Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how tactical voting could actually remove some specific and very unpleasant Tory MPs with backup from a bit of polling data. I suspect a lot of people think that some on the list are just too safe and there's no way of shifting them. I'm here to tell you that they can all be removed, and I will aim to demonstrate that. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So various polls at the moment show that the Tories could be beaten down to literally a handful of seats. It sounds fanciful, but remember that the Conservative government in Canada some years ago was beaten down to just 2 seats. It can happen. Current polling shows how. So what I've done is I've picked out 10 prominent Conservative MPs in a variety of seats, from very safe to actually they're going anyway. I'm then going to explain how it's actually possible to get rid of them with tactical voting. So for my list, I've decided to choose those who are either instrumental in the current direction of the Conservative Party and so need punishing, as well as those who aim to steer its future direction and need stopping. So my list is Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt, Jeremy Hunt, Kemi Badenoch, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Liz Truss, Priti Patel, Steve Baker, Suella Braverman and Lee Anderson. Granted, Lee Anderson may not be a Conservative candidate, but as we don't know, I've left him on the list and will assume he will be. So what I've done is to look up the results of the recent large-scale MRP poll conducted by YouGov, which did take account of the new constituency boundaries. Now, before I go over how I've analysed the data, bear in mind that MRP only takes account of the characteristics of voters and how many of those voters there are in each constituency. It's not an individual poll carried out for each constituency. It basically maps voting behaviours in general terms, although YouGov are proven masters of it. But my point is that it doesn't take into account unusual local factors. And I would argue that due to the personalities involved in this list, the motivation to vote tactically against them will be higher than normal. So if basing my assertions on this data in the MRP poll suggests that actually they can be removed by tactical voting, it will be even easier to remove these people by tactical voting. So before I go start over my list as well, I will also just point out that the fieldwork for this MRP poll was conducted in December. Since then, the Tories have become less popular, according to polling. It's specifically YouGov polling, but across all polling. So actually, that YouGov poll, that MRP poll, now flatters the Conservatives. So my first filter anyway is to simply show which of the 10 are already looking like losing their seats, according to this MRP poll that was conducted over December. So Lee Anderson would be gone, so Steve Baker. Polling shows that Labour are already on course to take these seats, but the MRP also shows that Penny Mordaunt and Jeremy Hunt look more likely to lose than win their seats as well. The margin is smaller, but they do look like losing. Mordaunt should lose to Labour and Hunt to the Lib Dems. But tactical voting will be needed to make sure it just won't take very much. Remember, something else which this poll can't take account of is the possibility that Conservative voters currently not saying who they will vote for will hold their nose and go, well, look, I have to vote Conservative because it's somehow better than Labour, right? But with the polling as it is, it would only take a modest level of tactical voting to absolutely make sure that Mordaunt and Hunt lose their seats. And we are expecting a decent level of tactical voting this year, which is why all the talk on GB News yesterday of Mordaunt being the favourite to replace Sunak, it's a bit of a joke. I mean, if they plan to replace Sunak before the election, why pick someone nailed on to lose her seat? And if she were the Tory Prime Minister, that would create an extra level of motivation for tactical voters. So she'd be even more likely to lose her seat. Sitting Prime Ministers do not lose their seats. You know, I don't think one has ever lost their seat in this country. But anyway, after those 4, that still leaves 6 Tories where the MRP poll shows that they are at the moment on course to win. So this is where tactical voting comes in. Now, tactical votes can come from a variety of sources, but we're mostly talking about people who normally vote Labour, Lib Dem or Green, but whose party of choice is not actually standing a cat in hell's chance of winning. So maybe some of them vote tactically to at least have a progressive MP representing their constituency. None of these targets are based in Wales or Scotland, so Plaid and the SNP aren't factored in here. although they will be part of an anti-Tory tactical vote in some seats of lesser Tories come the election. So what I've done is I've added up the Labour, Lib Dem and Green share of the vote according to the MRP as a sort of strength of the potential pool against the Tory candidate. Now, I'm not going to do what the Tories do here, don't worry. I'm not suggesting that, if all of these people voted against the Tories again with a single candidate, then magically tactical voting ousts them all. Now, there are a lot of these Labour, Lib Dem and Green voters who are simply not going to vote for one of the other parties, even if it's the only way to get rid of the Tories. It's not going to happen. I'm just doing this to show the potential before applying a bit of a more realistic filter. So this is what we get. In theory, enough voters to work together to get rid of all of them. But like I say, combining all of these votes tactically, not going to happen. So what is reasonable? Well, although by-elections aren't perfect because turnout is way lower, they are a good indicator. In the Selby by-election last year, for example, the Lib Dem share of the vote collapsed by 60% to help Labour to victory. In Somerton and Frome, the Labour vote collapsed by 80% to help the Lib Dems win. In other by-elections as well, we've seen evidence of huge levels of tactical voting. And if people will vote tactically on that scale just to embarrass the Tories in Westminster, how much more so to utterly humiliate them for what they've done to us in the general election? So I'm going to assume that the non-challenging vote share can collapse by about half, which is less than has been observed in the by-elections, to see what would happen. It would show that Rishi Sunak would still be safe, but I'll come back to that. Kemi Badenoch would be in a real fight, and it's basically a toss-up whether or not she would win. Jacob Rees-Mogg would be absolutely battered, he's gone. Liz Truss, Priti Patel and Suella Braverman, the witches of Torytown, would narrowly lose. Now, a little caveat here, or there's a couple of ones. One works against, one works for. So although I say there's been clear evidence from by-elections that there has been a lot of tactical voting and going on, it has tended to be between Labour and the Lib Dems exclusively. The Green Party have generally in by-elections improved their share. They've not really taken part, potentially because they don't really gain anything themselves from this tactical voting. Not that either the Labour or the Lib Dems are officially in favour. In fact, mention it and they become proper dicks about the concept. But they must know privately it's doing them an awful lot of good and will deliver both of them a lot of extra seats in the general election. But I will also just point out the other way. So people that vote in a by-election are much more likely to be, or there's a higher proportion of the sort of partisan voters. Whereas if you look at the extra people who will vote in a general election, they tend to be much more sort of non-partisan potential swing voters. So there may be a load of them who would normally want to vote Green Party who are much more likely to vote tactically if they can be persuaded that actually they can get rid of what they think is their safe Tory MP at the time. And as I say, the biggest prize of all is reducing the number of Tory MPs down to the point where they're not even the official opposition. Like, how much easier will it be to restore some faith in politics if the Tories are stuck at the back next to the DUP? Because as the official opposition, they still have a voice. Remove that voice. I mean, you have some voice in Parliament, but not very much if you're really stuck at the back. But there is still this caveat that although Labour and Lib Dem voters appear to have been backing each other to oust the Tories in by-elections, the same has not been true of Green voters. But like I say, the by-elections weren't to change the government and certainly weren't to obliterate the Tories in the House of Commons. I think, as I've said, the general election can and should, and with the exception of Rishi Sunak, all of these MPs can be removed with modest tactical voting. It doesn't require a huge level. And when you consider that the polling, even with YouGov, shows that things have gotten worse for the Tories since this MRP poll was conducted, the odds are even more against the likes of Truss, Badenoch, Patel and Braverman. They can all be gone. Imagine what would happen if all of those characters lost their seats and could no longer take part in determining the future course of our politics. Because remember, the next Tory leader may well be in opposition, but they will be treated by the media as a potential future Prime Minister and they will be listened to. They will have a platform. If all of these people lose their seats, their platform will be limited to the Daily Telegraph and GB News. Now, just to throw another small spanner in the works before I discuss how we can get shot of Sunak as well, despite the more robust challenge. In order for tactical voting to work, you essentially need two things to be true. First, that people who are willing to vote tactically, not everyone is, I'm not saying that people should. But if you are willing to vote tactically, you have against the Conservative Party, you have to believe it's going to make a difference. Because for some people, it's like, look, I don't really want to vote for this party that is the most likely to challenge the Conservative. I will do if I could be sure it will help get rid of them. But if it won't, I'll feel a bit dirty. I absolutely promise there is no such thing as a safe Tory seat this year. The YouGov MRP poll had not a single Tory winning with more than 40% of the vote. And that was the very safest seats. None of those on this list are looking that good. None of them are on for 40% of the vote. And polling for the Tories, as I say, is worse now than when this poll was conducted. And it could well be worse still when the election takes place. Even if the polls produced since the budget, you know, even if they improve for the Tories, and they're not so far, by the way, the ones that have been published in this budget have not helped the Tories at all. I mean, I would say their last-ditch attempt to narrow the polls has completely failed now with this budget. Second, those who are willing to vote tactically and understand that this is the year to really make a difference may not know who the tactical vote is. So actually, although I say Rishi Sunak is probably the safest on this, arguably it's Kemi Badenoch. And that is because her seat is the classic case of where the tactical votes could be split. The MRP poll shows Labour as the closest challenger, but the Lib Dems not very far behind. In an area like this, with polling like this, it will not be obvious who the tactical vote is. It may be that further polling becomes clearer as we get closer to the election itself. And if you are in such a constituency and it's not clear at the moment, you know, do sign up to stopthetories.vote. And on a seat like this, they may release the tactical vote information very close to the election itself to be absolutely sure. But do keep an eye on it. You will get that before you need to vote. Because if it's not clear, Badenoch could be saved by the tactical vote being large enough to remove her, but unfortunately being split amongst two candidates. But there is no such confusion in the other cases. It's clear who the main challenger of the Conservative candidate will be. So if you are going to vote tactically, it is obvious which one to vote for. So then finally, Rishi Sunak, the richest plum of all. Even with half of that Lib Dem and Green support going to Labour, it would still look like Sunak will edge the election. It'd be very close, very uncomfortable, but he would just win. If some Conservative voting don't-knows turn up and vote for him as well, that will help him. So is there any real hope of getting rid of him? Well, yes. As I've already alluded to, there are numerous factors which can also work against Sunak. The first is that the Tories are in worse shape now than December, so this entire MRP poll is almost certainly flattering the Conservatives. It may be that an MRP poll, carried out by the same people now would show that Sunak actually is vulnerable. But then there's also the prestige of being the first voters in history to sack a sitting Prime Minister. We are absolutely going to see heightened levels of tactical voting this year. Not only are the conditions open to it, we're seeing it in by-elections, and there are organised campaigns working to promote it, which wasn't the case in 1997, for example, when we also had a lot of tactical voting. And then also remember, the MRP poll doesn't look at individual local issues. You know, having the possibility of ousting the Prime Minister, that is a massively powerful motivating factor for tactical voting. So there is going to be a lot of tactical voting either way, but it's way easier to persuade people to vote tactically when it's going to lead to taking a particularly prized scalp. Having the sitting Prime Minister kicked out of Parliament before they've even resigned from the government will make this coming election momentous. Don't think it's ever happened before in the UK, as I say. And it's not like Sunak really fires anyone up. You know, not swing voters, not even Conservative voters. You know, you can absolutely see larger levels of Conservative voter apathy here and greater levels of tactical voting being on show against him. So even Sunak is vulnerable, albeit less so than some of the others. Badenoch excluded, I would say I would describe Badenoch as safest purely because at the moment, we don't, you know, close to the election, it may become clear. At the moment, the tactical vote choice is not clear. But to make it happen, we have to let people know that any notions they have of safe Tory seats, they just don't exist this year. They have existed in the past and they will again in the future. Right now, and backed up by data, they do not exist. You know, they are all there for the taking. We can not only stop them determining the course of our political future, we can send a warning that populism does not work in the UK. let it be a warning to those who want to keep the Conservatives marching down the path towards fascism, because that's what they want to do after the election. Beat them back so badly. So not only do the leaders calling for that path are removed from Parliament, let the ones who do get to win some seats know that voters will not accept it. And if you want to be a Conservative candidate for the following election and win a seat back, you will have to make clear that you will not go down that path. If they won't let him back in even a minor way, they will have to become a serious political party again. And then we'll adopt PR to stop them even doing that. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.